So I'm really excited here for today's episode of the Framework Podcast. I'm going to be joined by Doug Boneparth, somebody who I've known now for a number of years. We've been at a lot of conferences together and have interacted, probably more so on Twitter. Probably a lot of people now know Doug because of that. So really excited, Doug, to have you on the show here today.
Hey, I'm excited to be here too. It's good to see you, and thanks for having me.
Yeah. So last season of the show, I did a lot of icebreakers around food. I'm going to pivot away from that a little bit this year. However, I would be remiss not to bring up food with you here to start, right?
Fair enough.
Right. You've built a little bit around that as an image and a brand. So first of all, for people who don't know you, tell us a little bit about that side of you, right? The food. What's your favorite food item or drink?
Yeah, so I have this kind of reoccurring shtick around coffee. I think a lot of people online know, my affinity for home brewing and making pour overs and really just loving and appreciating coffee. Little do they know, I actually really love food in general. It's hard to not, live in New York City for a long time and really, develop a nice palate and get to dine at some really fantastic restaurants. It's probably one of the best places in the world to actually eat food. So yeah, it's been distilled down into coffee for the shtick, but just food in general. My wife and I cook a lot. So it's just a big part of our lives. So yeah, we're foodies for whatever that's worth.
What's the best thing that you guys make? Or is she the better cook or you? There's
Yeah,
only one right answer.
I'm the better sous chef. She's definitely the better chef. I can cook, but she gets more cracks at it. So she can do it a lot faster. Like I can cook well. It just takes 4 times as long, and that's not good when you got little kids and it's already late in the evening and you want to eat and you're hungry. So she's probably cooking up more, more of the stuff. And what's our favorite? That's a really tough question. There's some real fan favorites there. I mean, it could be something simple like proteins over a quinoa bowl that just come out amazing every time, or it could be, a roasted pork dish, or there's a roasted chicken she does on the cast iron that, with potatoes, and we keep the bacon fat from cooking bacon on Sunday, and just you get these crispy potatoes pretty much covered in bacon fat and a chicken cooked. Nothing's worse than a dry chicken, and nothing's better than like a perfectly cooked moist chicken. So that's a weekly special, but there's a lot of stuff.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things they suggest, right? If you want to know how good a chef is, right, you try their chicken, right?
Yeah.
Because that's kind of anyone can make it, but it's hard to make it really good.
Yeah. All moms of the world, cooking their chicken at 350 for like 50 minutes is a sure shot way to like completely ruin the chicken. Like super, super high heat, in the cast iron. If you can figure it out, you got a winner.
Awesome. So I also wanted to ask you this at some other point. What's your first experience with coffee, right? Like when did that become, a thing for you?
Valid question. I wrote about this. So before COVID, I had a blog that I would do every week. And, one of the downstrokes here, one of the things I lost was writing on a weekly basis. It just kind of fell by the wayside. And I hope that comes back, coming to a blog post near you in 2021. I actually wrote about it. It was called Coffee is Life. You can find it on the blog or just Google that. And it was the story of why really, like why coffee? Why do I get so excited about it? And it hails back to it's a story about my grandmother who introduced me to coffee when, I looked at her after we'd always have holiday dinners at her house, and we'd always have dessert, and she'd have a cup of coffee. And I'm like, why does grandma like this drink so much? It literally looks disgusting. And I remember I first had my very first cup was loaded with probably more sugar and cream than coffee to make it palatable. And I looked at grandma drinking it black. And she wasn't making pour overs or fancy coffee. She was probably, brewing whatever you bought at the supermarket in a drip maker, but she was really appreciating it. And what she had done is told me basically, like, what I want you to do is drink this with less cream, less sugar every single time you drink it until you can have it black and actually start to taste notes and taste what coffee actually tastes like, because an untrained palate would taste, just bitter disgustingness, which I think is what most people, taste when they have coffee. But just like with wines and just like with things that are complex and have layers. And then in that story, in that blog post, I dive deeper and deeper into the parallels of brewing coffee, making coffee, roasting coffee, the whole process of how it actually gets into your cup and how you enjoy it as an analogy for life. And it just made me think of grandma, and it was a really nice story, and I was happy to write it. But that's the obsession with coffee. The short version is Heather, my wife, bought me a Chemex one year for the holidays, probably like 6-7 years ago. And she's like, why don't you figure out how to make really good coffee? And then I was like, you buy gadgets, you can choose your beans. Then you go down this rabbit hole, like any person who loves their hobby, and becomes obsessed with it. And now it's an obsession.
Yeah, no, I love it. I mean, I've grown into coffee over time too. So I didn't like coffee at all. I just viewed it as this bitter, terrible, like black burnt thing, right? Like that's what it was to me for a long time. And interestingly, like my mom raised us and she didn't drink coffee. She still doesn't drink coffee. So we didn't have it in the house for most of my life.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Yeah, so like there was no like way to kind of experience it. Now my stepdad drinks coffee, but that was like, I'm kind of like semi-formed as a person that already has some preconceived notions at that point. So like, yeah, this guy drinks coffee, but what does he know anyway? He's a transplant here. His opinions don't matter. But
right.
I was driving to a speaking event after my daughter was born, and like right at that like month part after your first kid, where like we have 3 kids now, and the third one a month in, we're totally fine. But like the first one, I feel like we couldn't sleep and like I'm exhausted. Right. And I drove like a mile from my house and realized I didn't remember the last mile and was like, I should probably have something to drink. So I went into a coffee shop and got an iced coffee because like I was like, that seems more palatable than hot coffee at this point. But now have gotten very much into it. So at least my daughter now is like my step into the coffee world. So it's
there you go. Kids will make you do a lot of things that you weren't doing before. And now I have 2 myself, and I can't imagine a world where I wake up and didn't get a cup of coffee, primarily due to them, but also just because I love it. Yeah, and look, interestingly enough, on the topic of personal finance, I was kind of making coffee a shtick. I really stepped in it when all of time is flying here. Is either, I think it was 2019, I think it was last year, right? When like coffee became the latte effect, or the latte factor, where millennials are blamed of not being able to save because they're spending all their money on $5-6 lattes and cappuccinos and Starbucks drinks and stuff like that. And financial gurus, damning the kids for doing it. And I was like, oh my God, like what a perfect time to like have an obsession about coffee, be a financial advisor, debunk some myths here. So I really kind of like my marketing and just this funny thing around coffee and anti-Keurig and K-cups and that whole shtick really turned into an opportunity to further kind of build a platform around this on social media and just, through content creation. So I surprisingly just caught a lucky break there, and it really worked out rather well.
Yeah, I think, what is it? Kevin O'Leary went after that in like a year or 2 ago, right? And he said he does that's the one thing. And but then the funny thing is, right, doesn't he spend like $30,000 a year on haircuts or something? And you're like, well, I don't know what to tell you here.
I got this close to actually, sparring with him on air about, that coffee comment. And, we're not here to attack people who are all obviously promoting, financial literacy. I think at the end of the day, when we look at, people of note in the personal finance space, look, whether it's Dave Ramsey, Susie Orman, Kevin O'Leary, I mean, they're trying to at least, share in financial knowledge so people improve their lives. And I would, just on that comment say, different strokes for different folks. I personally believe, focus on the big expenses, focus on the things that really move the meter. You even made a video not too long ago about this. The little things obviously do count, but if you're really trying to make an impact, $4,000 rent versus $2,000 rent is going to do a lot more damage than, 3 cups of coffee a week versus 2 cups of coffee a week. So,
yeah. And, kind of getting into that side, there's a question that I want to start asking guests. So I think you're the first one I've asked this now of, but this is something that you probably ask clients or some version of it. And I have in the past, which is, what was your first experience with money? That's one of those really powerful questions. And I thought, you know what? I think it would be really cool to hear from advisors on what their experience was, because, it's going to be different all across the board. So, what was your kind
Yeah,
of first money experience you remember, positive or negative?
I think it's a negative one.
Yeah.
The thing that sticks out in my mind. So I always joke that I come from a long line of auctioneers. Like my dad's father was an auctioneer and an appraiser in Manhattan, specifically up in the Bronx. The guy knew the value of a dollar. Like the Bonapartes, my father, his father, and even their father, grandfather, however many generations we're out now, we're savvy business people. Like that has been the lineage here. And I remember distinctly, not to get too off base and kind of go through the generations of Bonaparte here, I remember my dad and grandfather talking about something money related. And I said, I'm in the back seat of the car, and I said something like naive. I'm very young, maybe like 7, 8, 9, something like that. And I just remember my grandfather either looking back or just shouting, like, you don't know the value of a dollar. I said something ridiculous about money that truly demonstrated I did not know. I was also young. Of course, I didn't know. But I remember it being said in such a way, I took it so personally. It did not make me feel good that I remember it to this day. Like out of all the memories I have amazing memories. He's an awesome grandfather. I remember being yelled at, and like that was a thing. Like my business savvy father and grandfather having an adult conversation about finance, and they turn around, to your grandkid and say, "You don't know what the value of a dollar is," and it just to this day has me think about it, even back then. So that I think might have been one of my like first money experiences in the context of like we're actually talking about like money from an academic or from like a real big boy big girl point of view. I don't know what they were specifically talking about in the context. I just remember getting yelled at. I didn't know what the value of a dollar was, and that resonated with me.
Yeah, no, it's a great story. Yeah, and I try to think back about a lot of stuff. The thing that's resonated with me a lot again is my kids, and I keep like thinking about like what's their experience going to be like with it. And I think your wife's an attorney too,
Yes.
right? Is she? Yeah. So my wife and I are both attorneys, and my daughter, who's 4 now, I don't know if she's grasped a whole bunch of money concepts, but she has learned is the value of making deals. So both of us, right, we're negotiators. And so my daughter now is
Dude,
constantly like,
yeah.
Dad, let me make a deal with you. And she says
Dude,
that every day. So she
so
does know deals.
yeah, no, we're this is a very attorney centric thing here. I'm seeing parallels. My older daughter is one heck of a negotiator because her mom, Heather, my wife, literally is a
Yeah.
did claims counsel for many years before stepping into a GC role. And she is she's the one holding the bag at the deal table for an insurance company. And I took every negotiation class there was to take in business school at NYU. And it literally, as much as like it's good to learn that, like I learned I actually know nothing compared to like watching my wife who actually does negotiations for a living. You can study this all you want, unless this is true of a lot of experiences with money. Unless you actually experience it and do it and practice it, you're probably not going to be all that good. Again, you can read the best books in the world and pass the test, but in real life situations, here's Doug Boneparth, financial advisor, extraordinaire, like doing a really bad job negotiating his house, negotiating, the renewal of his rent. I mean, if anything, I was taught was like, go hire an agent, go get Heather in here.
Yeah.
She's going to do a much better job than I am. Why not go down? I think a lot of people also need to know, hey, when to hire someone who's better at something than you are, so you actually get more value out of the deal. Put your pride aside, kind of thing. But in the context of the kids, I wanted to say 2 things. One, Hazel seems to be a master negotiator from watching her mom and dad a little bit here, just like your kids. And then number 2, as far as early money lessons are concerned, I wanted to maybe just comment on that. I remember because Heather and I were writing 3 years ago, we finished writing the Millennial Money Fix. and we got into a conversation about really how you teach young kids lessons about money. And I think, in our echo chamber, we see all the hot takes and we see a lot of opinions and a lot of great ideas. Certainly, we got to get it into the classrooms. No joke, that would be wonderful. But it starts at home. And I remember Hazel asking. This is when we just moved to the suburbs. We left the city. Hazel's not even a year, or maybe somewhere between 1 and 2, and I'm at home with her until we figure out like daycare situation, and we have to drive mom to the train to get to the city to go to work. And Hazel, who can now talk, is like, I think she was upset. She's like, why do we keep on having to drop mom off on the train? She was upset. Her mom kept leaving every morning, and talk about from a stereotype point of view how reverse this is in a good way. But I remember we both turned around and kind of had the similar answer of, all right, well, there's a money lesson here, but how do you even give that lesson to someone who's not even 2? And it became apparent to us that all we needed to say was, mommy goes on the train so we can do fun things, right? Like that simple. Just bring the association of, person, working, stuff, like, and like what the kids want. Fun times with their mommy and daddy. Why can we do all these fun things on the weekend? And we kind of were like, hey, that's a money lesson for hopefully a good one for, not even a 2-year-old. So those are they learn. And then, 2 years later, they're master negotiators.
Yeah. It happened fast. So
very, yeah.
So yeah, let's go. I mean, we've gotten a lot of color around your story already, but let's go through, just kind of your experience and then how you became a CFP professional and in financial planning. So wherever you want to start with that, right? It's your story. You can pick the start. So what's the kind of best place where did you start realizing that, I guess?
Yeah. So I'm, my competitive advantage in coming up as an advisor stems a lot from growing up in the business. I've had, a really not only an early start, but an advantage in, being a second generation CFP. And it's something I don't take for granted at all. I mean, I had a lot of doors opened from an experience point of view because I grew up in the business, and my father, who's still an advisor going on 35 plus years, I think at this point. So I grew up around it, but there's obviously a lot of time in which, I never knew I was going to be a financial advisor, despite, filing consolidated statements for $2 an hour in my dad's. I didn't know what I was looking at, but you would at least hear these types of things and learn a little earlier. It wasn't until college really where I was arguably having a lot of fun, maybe too much fun. And I think my dad became a little worried about what I would be doing with my life, especially since I no longer chose to be a business major and I became a communications and a PR major. He's like, oh, it's all crumbling. I got to go rescue this kid. And I've told this story in many capacities, but the more abridged version is I came home after my freshman year of college to find a Series 7 manual on my dad and an opportunity to get licensed and start learning the family business and how to be, a financial advisor. And that started with the education component. Ironically, here I am a year ago dropping my 7 to be a fee-only advisor. So, I mean, we can get into that. But yeah, at 19, I passed my Series 7. I was, gently, if not forcefully pushed to go do more exams and learn more. And I think the big takeaway here is an interesting mix of things that matched my skill set of liking to work with people, solving problems. The communications degree I was earning, little did I know, would fold beautifully into creating long-term relationships with clients and knowing how to communicate with them at a firm level, at a personal level, as far as actually being an advisor to clients. But I got lucky in terms of where I grew up into it. And I also had to apply myself and figure out what I liked about it. And, after getting trained up really well, the relationship with my father and I turned pretty toxic after college when I had moved back home. he had his vision of, Boneparth and Sons or Son, and the whole, legacy planning and taking over the practice. I think maybe in his calculation, he missed that, I would fall in love with Heather during college, and she would go to law school in the
Yeah.
city, and I would always just want to do things my way. And there was a part of me that just wanted to not only be with her, but be in the big city. And just, I would say, living at home and working for a parent is an interesting and very tough dynamic if it just doesn't naturally fit very well. And it didn't for us, especially when your heart's breaking because you're no longer with the person. I mean, Heather and I were together throughout all of college, and this was really the first time in our lives. Here we are, 10 states apart from each other, not knowing how we're going to get back together. I have this great opportunity. I'm already studying for my CFP, out of university into my first year post college. And, when, luckily my father and I both figured out before it was too late that this wasn't going to work between us. And he knew my eyes were set on New York City. So I took everything I was able to learn from him and this really amazing experience. And that, when I say competitive, I think that's what it is. So many young advisors obviously don't have that opportunity coming out of school who want to be an advisor, to say, hey, look, I know how to operate a practice. I know how to write plans, do transactions. In the 4 years I worked with them, I touched everything. Like, I sat in meetings no 22, 23-year-old would ever have sat in. They would never have drafted those plans. They would have never have gotten those one-on-one lessons about investments and products and how to sell and technique and all of this stuff. But I understood that that would have translated into some kind of value I could then provide another advisor that was in maybe their 30s, early 40s, that for the first time needed staff. And that's how I was able to go from South Florida up to New York City, of all places, and say, hey, you're going to pay me a salary and give me an opportunity to build my own practice within yours, and then we'll continue to build together. Like, that was a huge value proposition for anyone, which is why I had not that much difficulty, going from New York to Florida and being able to, at least have a beer on the weekend. It's not like I, was going up there into your premier investment banking shops and making $120,000, right out of college. It was not even half that, but it was enough to share to share an apartment with some other 20-something-year-old and, try and give it a go. So that's how we got from Florida and starting in the, this is now we're talking, we're talking so many years now.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, you went the wrong way. Everyone goes from New York City to Florida, right?
Yeah, that's the joke. Well, born in New York, my parents are obviously, indicative of that. Here's two New Yorkers who went down to literally Boca Raton, Florida, in their 30s, only to have their youngest child go to New York City, in his 20s. They're like, where is he going? And my brother, ironically, would go to Minneapolis too. And he returned to Florida just this week, believe it or not. Smart move on his part, but he doesn't have a family like I do that was keeping him grounded here. So it looks like Northeast for a little while for me. Anyways, that's like the first phase of how I started in the business and got to New York. And, bona fide wealth isn't even a thought at that point.
Yeah. So let's then move into that. So that's closer now to shifting from how you got here to what you're doing today, right? So let's get up to speed on what you do today and how the firm comes into this and then what you start to focus on. And I'd probably like to hear the story, as you said, of dropping your 7, which is for people who aren't in financial services per se that are listening to this, even though most people are that are on our show, is, that there is a movement out there in that space, right, of people moving that way. Ron Carson, our CEO, did similar thing, right, in that direction. So I'd love to hear your story on why you went that way.
Yeah. So for me, and for many years, I thought there was at least some kind of writing on the wall with the way the profession industry was shifting from, let's go all the way back. It starts out in the brokerage era of, getting commissions for slinging stocks. Those, I think that's now, we're very far away from that at this particular standpoint, but I think it still haunts the profession to this day. But the thing that we're talking about here is going into, being fee-only advisors or becoming, investment advisors, no longer being salespeople or these registered representatives of brokerage houses, we're getting into pure play financial planning and advice where investment advisor or even providing investment solutions, I think in the future is second to the financial planning and financial advisory and service, component. So I vision a complete flipping of the way it was to the way it's going to be. So, looking ahead, something I've been very good at is following trends. Again, when you grow up and you've been around this your entire life and are young and are, infused with technology and all this stuff, you kind of get a feeling for the way the wind is blowing here a little bit. You don't have to look too hard. You can see what the big players are doing, right? And you say to yourself, all right, am I going to have more work cut out for me down the road by not making a change today? So last year I said, I had an opportunity with my former broker dealer just to make that process a lot easier, to leave being, again, a registered representative who has their Series 7, their general securities license, hung over at that broker dealer, to really just registering you and your firm directly with the regulatory body, whether that's at a state or federal level, in this case, the SEC. And I took that plunge. I just think that people are going to be demanding more of, these marketing terms that have almost become more marketing terms than the actual, like when you say fiduciary, when you say fee only. I feel like advisors are catering to clients that are asking for that. So like someone has whispered in their ear, or they've read an article that says, these are the things you have to ask, and you don't want to be caught behind on that, especially if you're, in the business of growing your practice and developing business.
So what type of clients do you look for now? Like when, because you probably don't take everyone at this point, and, not every client's a good fit for every advisor. So what did you start to, because I know when people start in the business, right, it's that there's a joke, which isn't a great joke, but like, do you have money or can you fog a mirror, right? Like, welcome. But then as you get further in, you realize that like, hey, everyone's not a good fit for me. I shouldn't work with everyone, right? And so where is that transition kind of gone for you?
Yeah, I think observing. So when I did move to New York City, it was 2008. It was October. Like, I think I got off the plane at JFK and Lehman collapsed. Like that was my first day in New York City. And I was like, I'm going home. Like I was trying to buy another ticket, like right back to Florida. But in the first 2 years of being in New York City from 2008 to 2010, I saw what it meant to work in a practice that was primarily pre-retirees and post-retirees during a financial crisis, during really bad times. And one observation that I had was, wow, a lot of your time goes away to the phone ringing and people being nervous and worried. And this is the extreme setting, right? You hope that there's not a lot of 2008s in your future. Kind of got close here in March 2020. But that will come in handy, right? The experience that you get there in 2008. And somewhere along the way, over those next, let's say 4, 5, 6 years, as I'm building my practice, and now I'm in business school at night, I'm thinking to myself, how am I going to grow a business that I can relate to over the next 10, 20 years? It can't, as someone who is in their late 20s, it can't be chasing around 60, 70-year-olds all day. God bless them. They're, I'm not knocking that. Like that, that is mostly what I think, that is what most advisors, I think, do want to bring in, because there's assets. If you're running an AUM model, assets under management model, where you're trying to get money in the door, those are your people. They got the majority of the assets. I just didn't see how that was a good marketing plan for someone in their 20s, right? I just didn't see how that was the long-term play. And I was further stigmatized by what happened after the recession, student loan debt bubble, what was happening to our generation. So this is the first time I'll say the word millennials. What was happening to my peers? I was like, oh my God, not only is this terrible and there's a lot of debt that we need to overcome in the form of educating ourselves, we got, a pretty depleted job environment. We gotta, we're getting delayed here. But that was an opportunity, right? You always hear when things are really bad, like that's only one side of the coin. The other side is where the opportunity is. right? So people are watching portfolios crash in '08. People are buying the dip, right? And this was an opportunity there from just how I was going to structure the business and who I wanted to work with. I think that's the first time I said to myself, who do we want to work with? And it was my peers. Now I'm 36, so I'm considered an older millennial, but I figured if I could invest in the fellow students I had around the classroom, burning midnight oil, and going to show up at school after working a full day at some of the best companies in the world, there it was right in front of me. That's who we were going to focus. And the word millennial was just kind of popping off in the press, and I don't think anyone who was or is a millennial was like, "Oh, this is great." I think everyone was like, "Ew, like that's gross. I don't want to label." But I figured it wasn't going anywhere. Like it was sticking. So rather than fight it, I joined it, used the PR degree, used millennial, knew who I wanted to go after, and we can dive into the details, but the rest is history. That's the moment I figured out exactly what I wanted to do and who I wanted to work with.
Yeah, so you wrote the book then too, right? You and Heather. So when did that happen?
Yeah, so the book, just to put some timestamps on this, business in 2014, I think 2011, sorry, graduate, yeah, 2011 to 2014. The idea for working with millennials somewhere in 2013, 2014, 3 to 4 years into that, the book came out in 2017. So we were writing that, shortly after, just a few years into me figuring out I'd be working with this particular demographic. And I think an agent read a white paper I wrote specifically about, the differences in working with millennials versus anyone else. And it's like, why don't you write a book about this? I went home that day, told Heather, who was on maternity leave after having our first kid. And she's like, all right, I guess, we're going to be writing a draft for a book while she's home for 3 months, and, strike while the iron's hot, if someone's saying we can get this published. And we knew we were going to do it, and thank God we did it then, because I don't know where the time would have been found. I say that now as, we do a podcast and other stuff together, but, writing a book is a completely different project than, pumping out some podcast episodes, not to knock everyone creating podcast episodes.
Yeah, I mean, on the podcast side, this is always a fun conversation too, is, what do you see as kind of the future of the podcast world? I mean, it's, I know this is not a podcast about podcasts, which also exist, but I mean, it's nice to get people's perspective on that, right? Like, are you in the group that thinks the market's oversaturated, or are you in the group that thinks actually we're still on the front end of it, and it's more going to be like ones will continue to gain traction and grow? And I think that's a fair argument at this point on both sides. But if you look at the people investing in it, they're still of the opinion that we're in the very early stages of the kind of podcasting style world, because to some degree it's more like almost like radio opened up or TV opened up for the world. And if you went to somebody today and said, hey, you could have your own TV show, you'd be like, sure, I'm going to do that.
I find it very difficult to believe that like any area of content creation is oversaturated. If anything, I think people notoriously don't create content. By and large, people don't do this stuff. So inherently, to say it's oversaturated, I think is a farce. Are there obviously more podcasts today than ever before? Sure. But what do we always say about content? Like, if it's good, people will read it, people will watch it, people will listen to it. If it's good, it's good. Like, when has there being too many people doing something like ever stopped someone who's really passionate about doing it, from doing it? And I think that's really the key takeaway here. Like, if you are passionate about something, if you have an opinion on something, and you know what, even if it's not good, if you just enjoy doing it, right? So Heather and I did 10 mini episodes during quarantine just to see if we would like, creating stuff together in podcast form. Like, it didn't really matter. Yeah, it would have sucked if 2 people listened to it, but what if we could get a couple hundred people, not just our friends and family, but like, people from the platforms that we've been building for ourselves, and see if we could pull them into this direction. Would we just like doing it? Would it get some attention? If we could do, those are 2 low bars, by the way. If we can make that happen, we're going to go ahead and bring guests on and make a full shot at it and do a full season like you're doing right here. And I know you love doing this. You love creating this content. That's why we're on social media and doing these types of things. We get to share and interact. There's a lot of intangibles associated with it as well. I think for advisors, you got to have something to create, something to market, or just go buy books of business. Those will be for sale as well. I just don't like doing that. So no, I don't think podcasts in general are oversaturated. I think it's easier to create one than ever before. I literally, hired a consultant, was told what to buy. It came next day on Amazon, use what I know about technology, and turnkey solution. We have a podcast.
Yeah. And so you obviously have, you say, communication major, business, right? Right. Books, we're writing a lot of articles and blogs, still doing a lot of media, TV interviews, yeah. Right. So you've really embraced the full scale of, both content and marketing and PR to grow the brand and entity. So, was that all like step one, like a conscious decision, or have you grown into it? Because obviously, like New York one, I'd say people are more open to that because like you probably know like 10 people that live on your block that are in marketing or PR, right? So like it's all there. But yeah, like just walk us through that. Like, how did you embrace that? Because today, right, you've kind of embraced the full scale of that, right? Social engagement, video, right? All the pieces of it, not just kind of focusing on one.
Really awesome question, because it's a little bit of both. And I think it's important for people to know in all of these things, in all journeys towards success, it is never one thing. It can't be. It's success and failure. What about all the failures that got you to your success? What about all the blog posts or things you've tried that like you forgot about because they were just awful, but they're responsible for getting to something that's great. But when it comes to, how I was able to create a really kind of like high media presence, or be able to do a really robust PR strategy to grow the brand and the firm, it was a combination of, yes, you mentioned proximity. So being in New York City, where like my local news is everyone's national news. So yeah, getting a line in your local paper is the Wall Street Journal, or is the New York Daily News. And it was pretty grimy at first. It was just like straight up, spam, borderline spamming reporters. Like I built out a database of editors, reporters, writers. It got pretty deep. I had their Twitter handles, their email addresses, their everything I could find on them. And I put together a press kit, because I knew how to do that from school. I look back at this from time to time, like, oh my God, this is embarrassing. I didn't have a single article published. I think I became the CFP board ambassador for New York, was like my biggest claim of credibility at that standpoint. And by the way, that's a very important thing. I knew I had to establish credibility. So it was doing leadership positions, CFP board ambassadors, FPA, stuff within the profession, as well as if you could just get your name out there and speak intelligently about something that other people weren't talking about, or just getting a line, it could replicate on itself. And that's really what happened. So I put myself out there, was creative with that approach. Someone at the New York Daily News was like, hey, do you want to write a personal finance column? I was like, really? So, again, you hit up 200 people. I got like 3 requests to either provide a line or write something. I remember begging a family friend at a large media publication to like put me in touch with, she was the main editor, to put me in touch with her. She's like, if you shut up, I will, I'll happily do it if you just stop talking.
Leave me alone.
Yeah, exactly how that one works. And look, I remember the first quote being awful. I remember being so upset with how it was positioned and how it painted me out. And I took that lump and just kept pressing forward. I, again, remember my first line, how it turned into 5 to 10 to 20 to 40. And then I started to catalog all of it on my website. Probably a little more spotty in the last year because it's just I guess bragging is so much of it. But yeah, you could see 500 plus podcasts, articles, videos, features, you name it. We've done a pretty good job of categorizing it, cataloging it, making it easy to pull up. So if you're my client or you're a prospect, and you want to learn about student loans, or you just click, student loans, boom, you'll see 12 articles where I've given my opinion on that. So you can see I'm a subject matter expert in something, or I've weighed in on something. So it's really cool for personal reasons to know it's all there. Long story short on this, it was just overwhelmed. It's just get as much of it as humanly possible. And then like a different light bulb went off where it's like, wait a minute, this is doing something as far as search engines go and search engine optimization. And then you start, that was falling into this, right? So that was falling into, wow, I won some keywords by constantly showing up, New York City, millennial, personal finance. Like if you Googled these things, like you went to Bonafide Wealth or you went to Douglas Boneparth. And then when you had that realization that you were playing an internet marketing game, and this was real business, web traffic into leads, into clients, it became an obsession about continuing to build this machine, because you solved, the biggest problem, or you created the biggest magic trick, I say, in all of our industry is how do you get a new client in the door? And, 5 years of building this machine, it looks like a magic trick, like pop, you get an email, I'm interested in your services. Like there's not a single advisor in the world who wouldn't want that email coming through. Not just an email saying, hey, can we set up a consultation, but it automatically being someone you want to work with.
Yeah.
Like not even needing to qualify the prospect.
Yeah.
You can, it's just me and Marie. Like 2 to 3 of those, like you get 4 of those a month and convert 2 to clients, 24 clients a year that you want. You really can't do without hiring more staff. You can't bring on more than that. That's too much work.
Yeah.
And well, not that you wouldn't do the work, you don't have the capacity.
I mean, you sold it short there. I mean, it's not just advisor. I mean, that's any business, right?
Yeah,
like what business doesn't want qualified, right? With their products, services, whatever it is, right? That's exactly what every business wants, right? I mean, we're focused on one, but I mean, that's the key, right? You want people to come to you. I remember that, that's basically, I was asked by the president of American College, when one of the presidents that I had when I was there, he came in, and I remember his interview, and I wasn't prepared for the question, but this is what I spurted out. He said, well, how will we know when your retirement center has made it? And I said, well, when so many people come to us that like we stop going to people, right? Like that's when we know we're doing a good job. And that's kind of the same thing. Like, how do you know your business has built the brand that you want and the systems that you want, right? Is when, right, you're getting, right, 24 new clients a year coming in that you don't have to go look for them anymore, right? You've built that pipeline to them. And I think that's a really awesome thing.
I had no choice. Like truly, that's what kept me up at night in my late 20s. Here I was with all of this experience, this early start, credentials, getting a client here or there, it not being very specific with who it was. And, the reason I went to business school, half the reason was if I wasn't able to figure it out, I could at least take the credential and go work at a fancy private bank and have a good career and get my life, on the right track. And that would have been great. But would I have been able to satisfy the entrepreneurial itch that has always been instilled in me and my family? That go full circle back to the story of dad and grandpa who've always built businesses. They were in business together. That was kind of like, what you were destined to be. It's in your blood. So yeah, I would have felt like I didn't quite get there if I wasn't able to figure out how am I going to do. And plus, I left my dad's practice. Like I could have inherited and built up a business in my own image at one particular point in time. But how millennial is that? How many people do we know that, say, hey, no, unless I can put my own stamp on it and do it in my own way. I love what you do. I just don't like the way you do it. I don't think that's congruent with, my generation or the way things should be done working forward. Like that's kind of the culmination of all of these things. And, Bonafide Wealth was born out of that when, my previous partner was like, hey, let's buy more practices. I was like, no, let's grow organically. I'm like, hey, you do that, I'll do this. He's like, the resources ain't going to work like that. And it's like, well, all right, if that's the case, we both kind of nodded, we both saw what was happening here. And it was fairly amicable to say, like, I'm going to go do the thing I'm good at. You continue to do the thing you're good at. Thank you for everything. And,
Yeah.
bonafidewealth.com. There you go.
So you hit one of them. I was going to say, I know time-wise we'll be respectful for everyone and you here too.
Yeah.
Two follow-up questions just to wrap up here. One is, what's next for you, right? Anything big on the horizon or that impact you want to have? Then the last one is always, and you plugged it right once, but where's the best place to follow you? So those are kind of our last wrap up here.
Yeah, I'll be honest with you. I feel old hat now. I've been doing this in my career. Even though I'm 36, I've been doing this 17 years. There's only so much you can do before you start forging into just creating brand new things that nobody has seen. That's a lot of pressure. And I every day think about it. Right now, I'm working on getting season 1 of We Should Be Sleeping podcast with Heather out there, where we're going to have amazing guests. Some you've never heard of, some very well. It's not a financial podcast. It is, very much in brand, older millennial. It's not even a parenting podcast. It's just people who have found success differently. That authentic way of going about doing things differently, whether it's something traditional and turning it into something successful, how we view things today. So the We Should Be Sleeping podcast is going to be great. We're going to have guests. The mini episodes were awesome and fun, and that was successful. So that will start rolling out end of the year, beginning of next year. But back into, what to expect. The practice is going to continue to grow. Maybe I'll hire an advisor. That's not anything earth shattering or really notable to put in, the press anywhere. But as far as content creation goes, I have something that I'm busy working on as far as what to expect out of Doug Boneparth. I won't get into too many details on that, but it will be video. It will be, it'll be YouTube related. I'd like to put out, jokes. So here, this is what I will give away. I seem to be pretty effective when it comes to humor and finance. And I'd like to, kind of double down on the success I'm having there. Granted, Twitter has been a great platform for that, but I can do a lot more than put some characters together in a tweet. I can actually visualize that for you guys and get you some good jokes and hopefully exercise a little bit more comedy while also educating in the world of both finance, business, and personal finance.
Yeah, well, that's awesome. Thanks for sharing that. And then best place to follow you today for everyone?
At Doug Boneparth on Twitter, Doug Boneparth in your Google search engine, bonafidewealth.com. All roads will lead you to all these wonderful platforms that we all exist on now.
Yeah. Well, hey, that was a fantastic conversation. I'm really happy that we got time to do this here together too. And hopefully when the world opens back up, I'll see you again in person. But, and I'm glad people get to see your hair here too. My hair's gotten longer through COVID times again, but
I see that.
Yeah. Love the conversations, starting with family and working all the way through your business. And I know that's been a consistent theme for you, whether it was grandparents, dad, wife, kids. So love all the messages and look forward to everything that's coming next.
Thanks for having me. It's obviously great seeing you too. We'll be together soon enough for obviously coffee, but hopefully some beer as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Doug. And thanks everyone for watching this episode of the Framework Podcast.